Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Breer, and welcome to episode 30 of the 11FS FinTech Insider Breakfast Show, brought to you this morning by our great friends over at MyTech, who are providing tomorrow's identity verification for today's uncertainty. And uncertainty, we pretty much have at this stage, don't we? In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single day, straight into your homes at 8:30 BST here on LinkedIn Live. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Mr. Nick Ogden. Nick is one of Europe's leading entrepreneurs, having founded fintech heavyweights like WorldPay, ClearBank, and most recently, the cross-border liquidity network, RTGS Global. So today, we're going to be talking about everything with the current pandemic is happening, how that's affecting e-commerce, how it's affecting SMEs, and cross-border payments too. Nick, how is it going, my friend?
Morning, how are you? I'm fine over here.
And where is over here? You used to be like nearly my neighbour, didn't you? You used to live in a little place called Wroxham near Norwich, but you moved out, didn't you? You've gone on to bigger and better things. Where are you today?
Well, yeah, it's funny, one of these things, isn't it? The last 6 weeks we've ended up with all of these confessions about meetings that never took place, and we threatened to have a beer at the local pub so many times and failed on that.
Do you know, it was because it was.
I know. I know. I'm over in Jersey in the Channel Islands, which has become the world's upmarket Alcatraz. I think we're locked in. We can't escape. Canoes have been removed. At night we can see the glistening lights of France, but that's our the closest we get to civilization. Yeah. Sure. Well, I guess the reason I'm in Jersey is what comes around goes around. Back in 1994, I invented e-commerce, and that was invented here in Jersey. And sort of from those early days, we built Berkeley Square. We then created WorldPay, and those great businesses all started on this little rock in the English Channel. WorldPay, as you knew, grew significantly. We ended up with a massive centre in Cambridge, and going on from that, I then formed another business called Cash Flows, and then 2014 had this mad idea that the UK needed really to have another bank, so we started to set up Cash Flows as ClearBank, which is now employing about 300 people and growing rapidly. And last year started to look very, very closely at how the interbank market worked. One of the benefits I've had, I guess, through my career is being exposed to the plumbing of how the world's financial networks works. And so we came up with a plan to actually look at liquidity. And the latest venture we've got, RTGS Global, is about 2 months away from starting its stage one rollout. I keep getting called different things. I think the latest one's Godfather for some reason. I keep checking my bed before I go to sleep. Um, I mean, hacker sums it up because we all know what hackathons are now and all the rest of it. You go and try and fix a problem, you dissect it, and you try and come out with something from that which is new and different. And if I look back at my career, what I've done is basically looked at different things, come up with different ways of doing it, then being very, very fortunate to get the right team together to help execute it. And, that team's had to put up with Nick Ogden, and, I thank them for that, and build a business out of it. And, I'm incredibly proud that the businesses I've built are still all trading.
That's an excellent thing. How have you found moving to remote then, Nick? I mean, you're a bit of a global jet setter at the best of times, aren't you? Whenever I sort of get in touch with you, you're Washington or China or all over the place. So, I mean, how have you found being at home over this period of time? As your wife started to wish you were on the next flight to somewhere far flung, or is it is the sort of routine of working from home good?
Well, before this started, I went and got two things. One was a stack of Starbucks cappuccino, and everybody knows why I do that. And the other thing was a little bottle full of A1 kerosene, which is what you use to fly aeroplanes on, so that I could go down to the bottom of God and have a little sniff. Because when you're on 2 to 6 flights a week on average, you start to change. Um, it hasn't made any change at all, because from way back when we were building WorldPay, I got into this whole concept of visualization, where you visualize what you're trying to build, almost like architecturally, you almost have a blueprint of your business. And so the current project we have, RTGS Global, that's completely visualized. The whole team has been distributed. Yes, we have an office in London, but we were there so rarely before the crisis. And I mean, the biggest change in my life is I had to go and buy a desk, because I always use the kitchen table on my knee or airport lounge or wherever I was. And so I've had to sort of set up a home office.
I mean, that says a lot, doesn't it? You're going to be in somewhere for a little period of time, then setting up nest for a little while is a good thing to do. And it is quite bizarre, isn't it? When you're, like, say, I mean, having been a consultant for 15 years, it was a dirty corner of a Costa or something. So actually sitting still and having a comfy chair for a long period of time, it is actually quite a nice thing to have during this period. But so I mean, e-commerce, let's maybe just start there then, because I know there's a lot of things we can kind of pick up, and we've only got half an hour to go through. But I mean, the e-commerce revolution that we've seen, this is something that, as you say, sort of started way back when you were sort of kicking all this off in back where you are now. But during this pandemic, the organizations that are thriving are the ones that have followed your lead. They're the ones that actually are able to service customers digitally, rather than in that sort of analog world that we sort of lived in before. So, I mean, it feels like the pandemic is affecting literally older businesses in the same way as it's affecting more high risk older generations, isn't it? So the disease seems quite specifically picking on analog businesses, really, don't you think?
I think it's quite interesting. I mean, I live on a little island with 9 miles by 5. You hop in the car, you go to the shop, you buy something. And although we have e-commerce and all the rest of it, you didn't need distribution. Over the course of the last 6 weeks, we've had a little website set up by a chap called Dave, called fetch.je. And if you're interested to have a look at it, it's shops locally who are now having to do delivery because we're all in lockdown. So they built a business. It's growing incredibly well. It's delivering a great service. And I think people will get used to it post the crisis. I think if you then look into the UK and look at how other e-commerce businesses have developed, you've got the hospitality sector and the travel sector, hospitality in particular, which has been hammered by the COVID-19 crisis, where they're now saying, right, we can actually use our kitchens, we can still get access to resource, the availability of foodstuffs hasn't stopped. We can then change our business, use the famous VC word, let's pivot, and start doing home delivery and all the rest of it. So I think it's quite interesting, but I also think that most of us are starting to get used to this bizarre way of living. It's great actually not having to spend 3, 6, 8 hours, depending on where you're going to, traveling. And what would you prefer to do? Would you prefer to get up in the morning, do a call? I mean, I know you've got your pajama trousers on from the startup and whatever for this, have a meeting like this and then carry on. I mean, I think that, the biggest affliction that's coming out of this is we're all ending up by the end of the week with Zoom throat because of all the calls that we're doing.
Very true. I mean, we all need those vocal exercises, don't we, in the morning, just to kind of keep us going. But I think it is interesting. I mean, I wonder how much of this. I mean, definitely, like you say, the delivery services in local communities. I think they are things that can continue beyond this. How much do you think? And like you say, I mean, I'm in a similar situation to you. Business, particularly if you're dealing with a CEO of a bank, happens mostly face to face because of and not necessarily always because of them as individuals, but because of all of the they are the center of the nut, aren't they? The layers that are sort of built around them sort of operate to force individuals to kind of meet face to face, or not at all. So, and I think a lot of the security concerns around internet communications and video calls and all those things. I mean, I think we're proving over this period that, I mean, barring the odd flasher on Zoom, right? Then everything seems to be working okay, and businesses seem to be able to work remotely. So, I mean, I really do hope that as a group of companies, that people just start learning from this and allowing people to work a bit more remote.
I think that thank God for fintech, really, in financial technology and technology as a whole, because what would we have done if we hadn't had video conference?
Yeah, I know it would have been a very dark day. I mean, this thing's just for show here. Like, it definitely wouldn't have got me through the next 3 months of kind of working remotely.
Well, when I saw that, I thought perhaps you're on the CHAPS large value payment network in the UK, because as a bank we have to have a bat phone for that. And I thought perhaps you'd taken one of those along. But I think one of the really interesting things is the last 6 weeks there has been a massive education of everybody on this planet in relation to all things digital. And we could not have engineered that. It's impossible to have done that. Everybody is now starting to understand actually what these tools can do. Grandparents understand why their kids are fixated by their iPad or their PC or their smartphone, because they're getting fixated by the same devices which they use to communicate with their family. Yeah. And people say, oh, well, in a few months' time it'll be back to normal. I don't believe that. I think that people will have experienced a way of working and a way of communicating which has transformed their lives. And I think that many of us have probably talked more to our families the last 6 weeks than we would ordinarily do probably in a year. In the main, enjoyed that, and that will continue on. So I think the change which is starting to happen, the change in communication, in our lifestyles, how we choose to live and work, increase in productivity. There's a marked increase in productivity in relation to distributed working. All of those things people will start to realize, and then we'll say, well, do I really want to get on the train and go into London?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not.
I think we know the answer is definitely no to that one, don't we? Nobody wants to do that, but like you say, it's been the gravity has sort of sucked people there, hasn't it? But so, I mean, tell us a little bit more.
The first question a VC will ask you is, where is your office?
Yeah, well, because it's generally a predisposed view on how good your distribution is going. Doesn't mean you distribute to London in that way, but let's maybe move on a little bit, Nick, to what you're up to now. Obviously, through the things that you've kind of done. I mean, RTGS is where you're spending most of your time at the moment. Yep. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the particular problem you're sort of hacking to solve now?
Yeah, what we've basically done is looked at the way that money moves around the planet and how international payments are made, and looked at the cost and friction of the system at the moment. And we came up with a number last year of the cost of delays in the system. We thought it was about $2.7 trillion a year, small, insignificant number. And when we discussed that with our chums at the World Bank and the IMF, who are also involved in the project, they said, no, that's the wrong number, Nick. And we found out it's nearer 15 trillion. And so what we're trying to do is to basically speed up the way money moves. The way to do that is you have to do that safely. And the way to do that safely is looking and checking the liquidity, i.e. knowing absolutely and in an auditable format whether a bank has the money available to it to make a transaction. Mm-hmm. And if it's a two-sided transaction with two banks, whether both banks have got the money to make the transaction. And very interestingly, we've now under a lot of encouragement to try and get RTGS up earlier than we planned, because of the concerns out of the economic wave that comes out of COVID-19 in relation to potential liquidity stress. But what we're doing is very, very simple. We're just checking the bank has liquidity for a transaction, both sides, allowing them to negotiate whatever rates that they want. That takes 300 milliseconds. And then when the customer of the bank agrees they want to make a transaction, all right, the transaction creates a thing called a liquidity block, which releases the transactional liquidity locks in 50 milliseconds. And that transaction is between New York and Sydney, Australia. and the transaction's done. It's something called atomic settlement. It allows instantaneous transaction, instantaneous change of ownership of liquidity, and delivers real-time global settlements, equal payments to the world using fiat currency, as opposed to introducing a crypto intermediary.
Well, and obviously, we've talked about this before, Nick, haven't we? The mess that a lot of organizations and I mean governments kind of got themselves into during the last crisis was down to really nobody really understanding what the total tally was, and when everything stopped, we've said it before, it was like a weird musical chairs. When the music stopped, there was a lot less seats than anybody sort of realized there was, right? So this gives a real-time view of actually where all the money really sits, and as you say, a secure handshake between those organizations that are trading to be in a situation where they know that each other is good for it. It's kind of scary that we've got to this point in 2020, with all of the years of banking and trading and everything that's happened, that this doesn't exist at the moment. How does that work now? Is it just on good faith and brands credibility?
No, I mean everything works. We have global interpayment systems working today, but the trouble is they've all emerged from the legacy environments. That started 1970 when we started to throw mainframes into banks and all of that sort of stuff. I think one of the things is that we hear everybody talks about cloud computing and all the rest of it, and cloud computing is allowing things to be done in a different way. The speed of transaction processing that you need to deliver, global settlement for 180 currencies in real time is staggering. The ability to do that the risk that exists in the transaction, all right, is 50 milliseconds. All right, today it's days.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's taking that out. And what we've managed to do is come up with some technology, and also working with our partners in Microsoft, that actually allows us to do this globally in the Azure Cosmos framework, which they've created. And if I'm honest with you, we couldn't have done that last year. It would have been impossible. And it's purely because the development of the technology, or the foundations, if you like, has moved in such a way that we can now adapt technology over that and create these interplay systems. And I think that the other part of that is then how you do the edge connections and how you secure them. We do elect technologies using distributed dynamic PKI, which rolls off the tongue on a Friday morning, I can tell you. It allows you to distribute the risk and the security tokens in real time around the network edge. And that gives us incredible security in a way that hasn't been considered possible before. So we move in June into stage one. And interestingly, we're just finishing off all the extranet access for all the commercial banks on the pilot. Part of the COVID-19 incident has meant we've now added into that video conference capabilities and all the rest of it, on top of the 24/7/365 global call center that we have all ready to support the network.
It's an amazing thing. I mean, there's a really interesting question here from Michael Fuller, who says, Nick, in terms of the plumbing side of things, how much are the legacy systems impeding the view of the bank's liquidity? How do you overcome this? Because I'll let you answer this, but I've seen this inside a few times with a few different organizations, and it can be shocking how limited their understanding is of where, even in their internal system, all of the money sort of sits. But what do you think, Nick? How is this holding the big organizations back right now?
In the global financial crisis, the last one, not the one we're just about to have, right? It was the absence of liquidity visibility that delayed the reversal. Nobody really knew where the money was. So if you create a system where you have identifiable liquidity, and that liquidity is not only visible to the commercial bank, but is also visible to their regulator, you take a massive step forward, all right? Because banks advise their regulators of their liquidity position. Is part of their responsibility. And so all we're basically doing is basically taking that request. If a regulator phones a bank on a telephone and asks them for a liquidity position, the technology they're using, which is a phone line, is no different for them actually having online access to get the data themselves. So what we're basically doing is putting a bridge in to allow that system to be open and transparent between the bank and the regulator, and no bank I've spoken to or regulator has any concern over this, and then provide a position of liquidity audit in relation to global transactions, so that the regulator can see the liabilities that the bank has within the UK, for example, in relation to that bank's international counterparties, and vice versa, the assets that that bank holds internationally in relation to its international banking activities, all in real time.
I mean, and I know we've spoken a few times about this, but I feel like there's a real common thread through everything that you do. All the different businesses that you've had. It's speed. I think you bring about trust and confidence, but ultimately speed in all of these things. And I mean, we should talk about CBILS, because speed is clearly not something that has been particularly high up on their agenda at this stage. But whether it's what you've done with ClearBank, what you've done before that, what you're doing with RTGS, like there's a stability, a speed, and actually, I mean, one of the things that we've always sort of talked about with ClearBank, as you said, there's not many organizations that actually all the money that comes in stays there in terms of where it is. I mean, does all of these things point to just a instability in the global banking system that really, you're doing lots of bits to try and address these things, but I mean, does the global banking system work in the way that we really need it to create stability for growth in this way?
I think it's moving forward rapidly. And when we set up ClearBank, I was insistent that we would be one of the safest banks in the UK, the safest being the Bank of England, and we probably come second in relation to, we don't leverage our clients' assets. And that means that if all of our customers ask for all of their cash back now, they can have it back now. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
And having then deployed that given us a unique position, and in relation to working with credit unions, for example, who are providing access to finance which actually in the current climate is quite important. We've been able to build a platform which is quite unique in the UK marketplace. When the current crisis came together, and when the government started to look to basically provide financial intervention which is massively needed, it occurred to me that I've got ClearBank sitting in this hand, and funding options, where I'm fortunate enough to be chairman, sitting in the other hand. And what we could do is take the streamlined payment processing capabilities and the central bank position that we have with ClearBank, and use that to accelerate the distribution of lending into the UK marketplace. The reason why that was so important is that in the speed or the rush to get things put together, and this isn't a blame of the government, everybody's trying to do everything they can in an environment that they've never ever prepared for. But the idea behind this was to increase the distribution and to actually activate the fintech and challenger marketplace, which is currently outside of the existing CBILS structure and bounce back loan scheme. And the reason for that is that in business, everybody knows the more people you have selling the product, the more chance you're likely to get some sales. We've got 167 alternative lenders in the UK, from major brand names, iWalker and all the rest of it, the top end, down to smaller niche companies, and they are all capable of lending. That's their business. That's the BAU for them. So if we could facilitate a route via a clearing bank to them of government liquidity in a safe way that allowed the money to flow down to them and equally allowed the loan repayments to flow back to the exchequer, that seemed to be a good idea.
And it feels like, well, it feels like the way in which it was set up before to essentially, I mean, the idea is sound, as you say. I mean, I feel like the government is doing it has the right intentions, but the way in which these things have been implemented is either leaving people sort of gaps in it, or, as you say, just the speed of actually getting the funds distributed to the people who really need it. It's like a charity raising lots of money, Red Nose Day, raising lots of money, but then not being able to distribute it to people in Africa who actually need it. We're in a similar situation here, because I mean, all of the data points to businesses having 25 days worth of cash reserves, and I mean, we've already been in lockdown for 6 weeks, right? So the world needs this, and it needs it now, doesn't it?
I mean, there's some really frightening stats out. I mean, I was on a call on Monday, and we presented with some data from ProSapient, which I know was going into Downing Street on Tuesday morning, where they've done a survey of businesses, quite substantial businesses, what ones you would just assume are carrying on fine, and they're not. This has basically taken 75% of their revenues out.
Yeah,
This
that's
affects
terrifying.
how their staff work. It's affecting how they communicate, how they keep their team together.
Mm,
All right. When you look at all of that and you end up with, approaching 60% will have disappeared in 6 months. How do you actually then turn around and rebuild that? Because if you've got the situation where the government's run out of money because it's lent it all to support the environment, that money's been lost because the businesses have failed. The people working in those businesses are unfortunately unemployed. The kickstart you need from that is, hang on, we need all the money we've just spent back again. Right?
yeah,
Then you get to the challenge of saying, okay, fine. Well, we can magic that up. We've got a printing press somewhere down in Wales that we can print this money from, right? Albeit the fact our cash usage has dropped by over 50%. Right. But then how do you pay it back? And I think the one good thing coming out of this, all right, is that whilst we've got these various initiatives going through, and we need to accelerate them, we really, really need to do that. Because I think accelerating isn't giving more money away, it's flattening off the economic tsunami that comes off the back of this. But I
mm,
think we then need to turn around and have a grown-up conversation. And I was in a conversation with the IMF and World Bank 10 days ago on the RTGS project. And we're just, in every conversation you have, you end up coming back to COVID-19 and actually discussing quite openly how the G7, G20 are going to have to take a leadership role in trying to work out how there's some sort of debt restructure or debt consolidation here to avoid our children and our grandchildren being, suffering, our medical bills for the next 20 years.
yeah. I mean, it is very difficult to understand how that gets resolved. Like as you say, that second phase of this in terms of the downturn and everything that goes there. I mean, I feel like a lot of companies are, and I sort of said this on LinkedIn and caught quite a lot of flack for it because people were. I mean, I think the banks are in a bit of a rock and a hard place right now. The government schemes in some instances exposes them. That I think there's quite a lot of risk being put on them to lend money, but equally there's not a lot of support necessarily over and above quite low guarantees, which to your point actually can create such risk in the lending book of many of the larger banks supporting larger loans. Anything over 250,000 right now either requires the bank to use its own reserves or the personal guarantee from the person who's requesting the loan. So the stresses and strains that this kind of puts into the system is, the word unprecedented carries almost no meaning at this stage, doesn't it, Nick? But how do you see this playing out? Because, like you say, if the banks lend money to every business, then as you say, there'll be huge amounts of defaults. Therefore, and then lots of businesses going out of business and lots of unemployment happening. I mean, the spiral around this can go on for decades and decades and decades, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, I started the week, David, with a crystal ball. I now have a glass marble on my desk. I've sort of rubbed it so much trying to work what's going to happen. I think the answer is none of us know what's going to happen. I think what we're trying to do at the moment is use common sense economic tools to try and preserve the economy. Right, that makes a lot of sense on the assumption that the money going into the businesses is enough to give them a survival runway, right, longer than 4 or 5 weeks. What the bounce back loans scheme does. So I'm concerned that that will be seen as a start and then will immediately run into the buffers because the cash flow runs out. I think then coming back from that, right, it's which parts of the economy, in the same way as we all want to get out of our homes, which part of the economy is going to be fastest to kickstart? Where can we start to recreate wealth? And it's probably the wrong word, but it's the right word in relation to cash flow and liquidity to basically grow the economy and start to revamp or recreate employment. It's going to be hard.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
if we get everything on the news this morning, BBC News, people in Beijing are being let go, they're going back out in the streets, masks are being removed and all the rest of it. That's great, delighted for them. if we get a second spike, we're going to see that, right? And that's the issue.
Yeah,
We have to do this all again.
I agree. And as you say, it's a global thing affecting everybody, isn't it? Both on a personal and a professional level. I think it's interesting as you sort of hone down on individual businesses and how they're trying to optimize. You know, every individual business across the planet right now is trying to manage cash flow. You know, they're trying to atomize where all of their money is and right out to a global level. That's what you're doing with RTGS, right? You're ensuring that the whole planet has a good view on actually where cash flow is in terms of how the banks operate. And at times like this, the world's doing its budgeting correctly is probably a pretty good place for it to be, isn't it?
I hope so.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, but thank you so much for making the time, Nick. I mean, we're good. I reckon we're going to be stuck here for another couple of months, so you'll have to come back and join us again if you can make the time.
I'm delighted to. Listen, stay safe, everybody, and thanks for joining us this Friday.
Very good. Where can people find out more about all the stuff that you're up to, Nick? There's lots of different websites out there, but where do you want to point people to come and connect?
RTGS Global, or at ClearBank, or on LinkedIn, whatever they choose.
Fantastic. All right, guys, that's all we have for you today, and that's all we have for you this week as well, actually. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. See you on Monday. I'll be joined by Bharat Bhushan, who is the Chief Technology Officer over at IBM. It'll be a super interesting conversation. Chuck in any comments, any questions that you've got. Nick, there was a bunch of questions that we just didn't get time to go through over on LinkedIn, so head over there now and answer some of those questions. If there's anybody else you want me to reach out to and get onto the show, let me know. Send me an email on david@11fs.com or put them or post them up on LinkedIn as well. Have a great day, everybody. Stay as safe as you can over the weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Thank you very much. Bye.